Welcome to Thrive in SVCN's Nonprofit Advocacy Series. My name is Janella Ordonez, and I am the Policy and Advocacy Associate from SVCN. And we are partnered today with Thrive for this session titled Influence and Impact, an Advocate's Journey in Media. We'd also love to learn who is in the room with us, so please introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, pronouns, title, organization, and the native land that you reside on. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping slides. As a continuing and evolving SVCN practice, we want to acknowledge that here in San Jose, we are on the ethno-historic tribal territory of the Thamian Ohlone, who were the direct ancestors of the lineages enrolled in the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and who were missionized into missions, Santa Clara, San Jose, and Dolores. For accessibility purposes, we have automated closed captioning feature in Zoom activated. With this, you can move the captions around on your screen, or you can disable the closed captioning feature entirely if you prefer to not have it up. To do so, please reference the bar at the bottom of your Zoom, click on Captions button to toggle the show or hide captions option. If you're having tech or other troubles during the session, please private message me directly in the chat. So here's the agenda for our session today. First, we will begin with a fireside chat from our panelists, Gabriela Chavez-Lopez from Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley, and then Lorraine Gabbert from SJ Spotlight. Then we will have time for a quick Q&A via the chat while everyone fills out a media landscape poll, which will transition us into our breakout activity. In breakout rooms, we'll use a power mapping exercise to develop a media strategy for specific issue areas. So why are we here today? Well, today marks the 6th installment of Thrive and SVCN's Advocacy Series, made possible with the generous support of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Our aim is to empower community-based organizations and nonprofit partners for fostering confidence in their advocacy efforts. Excitingly, our upcoming workshop on community organizing is scheduled for this August with some amazing speakers lined up, including speakers from Faith in Action Bay Area, Sacred Heart Community Services, and Puente de la Costa Sur. And with that, I now have the pleasure of introducing our first guest for today's session, Gabriela Chavez-Lopez. Gabriela Gabby Chavez-Lopez is the inaugural executive director of the Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley, an organization committed to developing and strengthening the power of Latinas. She was previously the communications and membership manager for SB at Home, focusing on policy and advocacy communications around affordable housing. She is a community catalyst, passionate about uplifting and championing voices around challenging issues in our community, particularly those that disproportionately impact Latinas and people of color. Now, our next guest is Lorraine Gabbert. Lorraine Gabbert has been a freelance reporter for San Jose Spotlight for the past 4 years. She brings years of experience to the job, including articles for 9210, Almaden Times, BABY, Bay Area Parent, LG Magazine, San Jose Magazine, Mercury News, and South Bay Accent. Now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Gabby. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Janella, for that wonderful introduction and for just really setting our intentions and laying the groundwork for today's discussion. I'm really excited to both moderate and participate in this wonderful fireside chat with Lorraine, my good friend and colleague. And we're going to be talking about influence and impact and really speaking about an advocate's journey and working with the media. So I'm even more thrilled to introduce my my great colleague, Lorraine Gabbert from San Jose Spotlight. Lorraine and I go way back to what feels like a lifetime ago, really early on into the pandemic. 2020. And so we actually have different recollections of our first interaction, but we'll talk to you about that and how this relationship has developed and dive in deeper into how important it is to develop relationships first when working with the media as an advocate or as a community leader out there in the community doing great work. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we first came to be. Again, there was a feature story that I believe Lorraine was assigned when I assumed my role as the inaugural director of the Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley. I remember meeting at a coffee shop down the street from my house. And she was there with her camera and ready to dive into, what was the vision and just a little bit more about me as a person and a community leader. And so that was my first recollection of our meeting. I know we probably went way over our time that was allotted for that, but we really decided to go on a walk. And obviously, it was in the middle of the pandemic, so we were catching up about things. I was telling her about I had obviously done my research and I knew about what she wrote about and things like that. And so was, just discussing with her about just how appreciative I was of Spotlight and her contributions there. And so I think really just really sort of, developing that relationship from day one. And I felt like she really captured the essence of what I was trying to do at the time with the organization, the plight of Latinas and what they were experiencing, and really heard me and asked great questions. And so that was the beginning, and we were off to on a great foot. And really focusing on personally who we were as individuals first, and understanding the lens in which we, were viewing the world. And I think that knowing that, obviously it was going to be a long form story, meaning that it was going to be, a profile piece. I think it made sense to really go a little bit deeper and dive in. I know she asked me for a few references, and I made sure that, I recommended people that really knew me and the organization. And so that was really the foundational developing of that relationship, but also from my perspective, how I viewed that first interaction. And I was really, really keen on having her be here with us today, because I don't think we should have any conversation about us without us. And so if we're talking about the media, I want to make sure that the media perspective and the folks that are representing and the individuals and the humans that are on the other side of it are really able to speak and be able to tell from their perspective why this relationship is really important, and from her perspective why, what she views as a really great way in which to get a message out there and to be able to support us in our advocacy efforts and all that we do as nonprofit leaders. So I'll kick it over to Lorraine to talk a little bit about what she recalls about our first interaction. And then we will just dive into a really warm conversation around just some tips and some different things that you can do in order to break through all the noise that's out there and really make sure that we are representing your cause and your community. So kick it over to Lorraine.
Thank you, Gabby. I think that what you mentioned was definitely the start of our developing our relationship. I felt much more than just interviewing any old person. I felt like we had developed a real relationship from your authenticity and from our sharing ourselves on a more personal level and not being afraid to talk about who we were as people and what our goals were. And I felt a really deep connection right initially. And then that was furthered through other stories that I had asked you for your thoughts on. But I recall the very first time I met you, I was so impressed with you and with the whole Latino base. There was a news conference that was hosted by the Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley and was to push Governor Gavin Newsom to appoint California Secretary of State at the time, Alex Padilla, to the US Senate. And this event that was held at Mexican Heritage Plaza, it was held by a large variety of community leaders, but they were all sharing a common vision and common goal. And I think that's what's so important about what we're doing today and about what nonprofits can do to focus their message and to approach the media, perhaps with partners and allies, or at least under their organization, have a very clear idea of what they're trying to get across. But as you were saying, we had that wonderful moment where we first met in depth, one-on-one. It was for what we call In the Spotlight. And it was all about trying to get to know you as a person, because we want to do this profile not only about you becoming the very first executive director of the Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley, but also about who you were, what you brought to it, why they chose you. So it was really a very satisfying experience for me as well, to feel like we had gone a little deeper. And then, not only did I quote you in future articles, but you became something of a resource for San Jose Spotlight, and other reporters reached out to you. And I want to just really quickly mention one other situation, which was the School of Arts and Culture looked to do redevelopment and create what they called a Mayfair district on Alum Rock Avenue. And this was a long-term investment, fundraising movement. And I was told that I was really influential in helping them to garner support and funds at times that they really needed it. So why I want to mention this is, I did at least 3 stories on them. And it's really, really important to stay in touch with the media and to let us know developments that are happening with your organization. Anything new, anything noteworthy, new leadership, because that way we will keep mentioning you and develop that relationship with you and put out the news you need to share with the community. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I think we can have a lot of objectives, right, with amplifying our work to the greater kind of public. That maybe that's a funder reading it, a potential funder, maybe that's a potential supporter, somebody that can receive services from your organization. So I think there is a prioritization that really should happen. I think with nonprofits, we don't always do the best of tooting our own horn, but I think letting our reporters and our contacts know what's happening. And sometimes these projects are long term. So, it'll be a 10-year project and you have new developments along the way. I was just emailing this morning a press release out to all my media contacts saying like, hey, here's a follow-up to the story that we did 2 years ago, and this is the solution that we've came up with because we identified the problem 2 years ago, and just being able to connect the dots for folks because they don't remember, they're not focusing on everything that we're doing as community leaders. And so really making those connections and really understanding that sometimes these things take years or a matter of months. And so just keeping on top of it. The other thing I heard also, Lorraine, is what we did meet at a press conference. And sometimes you see that line of reporters, you're at a press conference and you just walk away. And I would definitely recommend that you don't do that. I would recommend that a lot of times I will go up to those reporters, anyone holding a camera, anyone there that's there, introduce yourself, say who you're with, say you'd love to get their contact info to give them, leads on stories and things like that. But I think that's a great way to kind of like meet people where they're at. And so as you're at these press conferences or these media moments, even if it's not your own, it's totally fine to go up and introduce yourself and say, would love to know more about what you're doing. And sometimes it's a coffee. That's not really my style. I like to just lead with the work and kind of like dive right in and say, I'd like to invite you to this. I'd like to invite you to that. Or, you're speaking somewhere and you follow up with the reporter afterwards. So making sure you have, their cell phone numbers and your contact list, things like that is also really helpful, and just continuing to keep them updated with what's going on in the community, I think is really important. And similarly, a funder, one of our first initial funders, when we were a very small all grassroots organization, out of nowhere had reached out because they had read a Spotlight article in which we were kind of just even mentioned. We weren't even the center of it was just like this program of the Latina Coalition, and then they were like perked up their ears and they reached out. They became a really impactful funder for us for many years in the beginning. And so I think that there's a lot of objectives that can be obviously communicated, when you're doing that. So so definitely lots of takeaways and kind of things to think about as you're out there engaging with the media. Humans first. So knowing that, and then also understanding what are they interested in, what is their focus area. You don't want to send someone something that's not even relevant to their beat, as they say, or their focus area. And sometimes if you have a good enough relationship, I just got a text message from that today about that. I was replying to this right before, and he was like, I'm not covering it, but I'm going to send it to my colleague who is da 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 da. I'm like, oh, who's your colleague? Would love to know her. Can I have her information? So, not, just really following up and asking all those questions, I think is very real. And in real time, this is what's happening on a day-to-day. And I'm also an executive director, so I'm not a comms person. My background is comms, but I'm the one usually that's sort of keeping in touch. And sometimes it's depending on your organization and the skill set within your organization, it makes sense to have different people kind of like have those relationships. You might have a comms director, you might have somebody that's doing policy, you might have, but it's good for there to be at least a contact there, to be able to keep those relationships going. So a little bit that Lorraine touched on was regarding the message, and a really unified message. I think it's always critical to know what is that very short, concise, easily digestible message or ask. It's usually understood very easily by the general public. It's not wonky. It's not something only someone in your field would understand, for a broader audience. And then also, it's usually what I call a sticky. It sticks with you. Something like a hashtag, something like a kind of like a battle cry, which it's like the Black Lives Matter. It's like it sticks with you, or equal pay for equal work. Those kind of things that it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. I want to know more. And so could be a bit provocative, because I also think that provokes a response as well. So and it usually answers the question, like, what are you solving for? Like, why do Black Lives Matter? Well, because there's racism that exists in this world and we want to address it, right? And so it's usually addressing that. So Lorraine, how do you feel about a message, and how someone first communicates that out with the media?
Well, stepping back, I absolutely agree with you that at a press conference or news conference, definitely don't be afraid to approach people. Share your business cards back and forth, because future stories will come along, and it's always good to have contacts both directions. If you're writing a press release, make sure that you include some current information as far as dates and who, what, where. Have some quotes in there, have some inside perspective to really get people excited to cover it. We want to have a deep understanding of the story, not just a soundbite. And we also really like to come back to people who we feel are knowledgeable in an area, and maybe ask about background for a different story. That's also very helpful. I would like to also share your idea of maybe setting up a coffee. It's nice to build those relationships. Now, when we might call you and ask for a quote, I know everyone is very busy, but please understand that we have a very short turnaround time for stories. So if you can't get back to us by a deadline, it just won't work. And you will not be included in the story. So definitely make sure that you make time to speak with the media and give us all the information, as well as some information that is not already out there, because we want to, from our perspective, have something new and interesting, engaging to share with the public. We want to help to profile what you want to say to change hearts and minds and make a difference in the community. But we want to make sure that we understand the issue fully. So make sure that you guys are well versed in what you want to get across, the main points, and what you want us to take away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to mention too, on that point, because I kept beefing up my press release over time, because I wanted to get some data. I wanted to get some quotes. I wanted to get this is a press release I was working on last night, but making sure that I contextualized it, although it's just a press conference on the surface at an event. I wanted to contextualize it in this bigger picture, right? So like, what are those trends? What are those data points that you have to share that really tells the story It makes it easy for someone who might not be a subject matter expert, right, that's writing about it, to be able to have all of these different layers of understanding. And I think that, and I still got questions as follow-up. My phone is getting blown up right now, actually, by the way, because I sent this out this morning. But still follow-up questions like, hey, I just want to clarify, da, 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 da. So you think through everything, but still you're like, okay, it's still not getting communicated. But I think it's just being responsive, being available, and asking what the deadline is, as well, in case they don't share that, saying what's the deadline if you are busy. If not, maybe be able to recommend someone else. I've done that many times where I'm just on vacation, and I'm like, never mind. I actually do take interviews on vacation. I'm kind of bad like that. But if you are protecting your time and you have those boundaries, you can always refer someone else and say, hey, you should definitely reach out to my colleague. They would be able to provide comment. So just being a resource, I think. I think also being able to identify your audience, once you get your message down, who needs to hear it? Like, who needs to hear it? And I think different platforms and different publications have different audiences, right? And so just kind of understanding, who that publication speaks to and what they talk about, I think is also very relevant. And also, I really think leading with the work always. The money, the attention will follow. But I think really putting the work front and center, putting the issue front and center, because it's not about me, it's not about my organization, it's about the issue. It's about, there's a challenge in the community, there's a disparity that exists, and this is what we're doing to address it, and we invite others to join us. It's like the coalition of the willing, right? And so we're not here to, I mean, ideally we want to change hearts and minds, but at the same time, maybe we just want to energize our base. Maybe we just want to energize people that are already, with us or close to us, to be able to say, like, we need to prioritize this at this very moment. And the other thing I want to talk about is sometimes what comes up is just an opportunity, and you have to strike while the iron's hot. So I won't call it anything specific, but there is something that's brewing around the wage gap stuff. And so sometimes there's a lawsuit, sometimes there's something that's very timely that you can tie into, or your issue, or a funding announcement comes out and you're like, whoa, like, we got to make this announcement. So some things you have to be responsive of, but I always think it's better when you can be a little bit more proactive. And I think where to find media outlets, I think we already discussed that, at press conferences, online, on, I know Twitter or X or whatever, there's a lot of, reporters that are on there, subject matter experts. So social media, you can direct message folks through social media as well. So I think that there's a lot of ways. I mean, I prefer, text. I don't know that all media does. I don't know if Lorraine has a preference. I prefer text, but email, I'm sure, is great too. And again, they're going to open the email and they're going to reply to the text as the relationship develops, right? They're going to prioritize that. And so I will say, because I understand everyone's at a different place in their careers and time doing this. I've been doing this, 7, 8 years. So reporters, like, we have those relationships, they reply to me right away. But there was a time when 3 years ago, I never got responses, and I had to be very, very okay, I just take that as I need to develop more of that relationship. So don't take that bad. I think it's just we have to just continue to stay on it and be consistent and just keep showing up, keep sending them stuff. And they're gonna be like, wow, she's really not gonna go away, is she? So I think that's just, don't get unmotivated or feel bad about it. Sometimes it's just not the right time, or maybe they don't see the relevancy in the issue. But I think that just will change over time. What our media needs? Let's talk about that a little bit. I think there are some specifics that the media needs, and I was going to hand that over to Lorraine to talk about.
Thank you. One thing just to let people know is that there are different ways to contribute to a story. If you are being interviewed, then that is on the record, and quotes are going to be used of what you're saying. It may be recorded, it will definitely be written down. Now, if that's something that you're not comfortable doing, you need to say right up front, this is just for background information, this is off the record, and I'll be happy to connect you with someone who can give you the quotes that you need. And also feel free to connect us with people from other organizations who share your viewpoints to help get the message across. So just be aware that if you are being interviewed, it may very well appear in a publication. Now, that's not a guarantee because you're interviewed that you will be included and that everything you said will be included, because there is editing that goes into play and there's only so much room per article. The other thing that Gabby hit upon that I want to talk about is sometimes it's not even about, it's definitely not personal. And sometimes it's just about what seems timely to the media source and whether it's considered really newsworthy from that perspective. So please don't take it personally at all. And please continue to connect with us. We definitely want to hear from you. And I have no doubt that there'll be a point that it will be covered, but be patient and continue that relationship. And it might end up being that you'll be a resource not only for your organization, but for other related articles that you might be able to speak on. So from the media standpoint, definitely be knowledgeable about the issue, be upfront about what you can contribute to it, and please feel free to share some inside information, not just sound bites or things that we have heard, not just things that are in the press release. The press release kind of whets our appetite, makes us really interested in the material and the subject matter, but we're going to want much more in depth, more quotable quotes, and just really deep and hard-hitting information. So thank you, Gabby.
Yeah, wonderful. And holding each other accountable. I think that's the other piece, and follow up. So if they get something wrong in the article, and that's happened multiple times, they get my title wrong. And so you want to make sure that you, and if the reporter doesn't ask, make sure you get your title right, your name spelling right, all those things. And then sometimes there's been times where a photo of ours was used in another article that had nothing to do with us. And I'm like, okay, well, you have to credit that that's our press conference, or that, so you can follow up, and or if they got data wrong, or the reporter is going to feel some type of way if you gave them wrong data. And so you have to make sure that you're a good source, and so make sure you check all your data, all your information that you're sharing. And sometimes I've said something that was incorrect, and I like follow up right away, and I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, it wasn't the right city that passed that ordinance. It was actually Sacramento. And I wanted to let you know that like right away. So don't be afraid to correct each other, and to give you and hold each other accountable. Or, oh, you just really didn't exactly get what I was trying to say. And I would really appreciate next time if like we could, now we know, blah, blah, blah. We can just work through that, like any relationship, right? There might be some angst there, or some disagreements, but I think it's also really important to follow up and follow through. And a little bit of gratitude goes a long way. So I love sharing with reporters, like, I really appreciated you covering that. Like, you really hit the nail on the head. Or this happened because of your article and your news coverage. Like, we got that extra funding, or we had someone reach out to us about this opportunity to go speak at a national conference, and just being able to like really show that appreciation. I think isn't lost on anyone. And I think I would always recommend that in general, but I think that goes a really long way. And then always have something that you want to reiterate at the end, because every single reporter is going to say, do you have anything additional you want to add? Do you have anything that you want to make sure is really included in this? And you should always, like an interview question where it's like, do you have any questions? Always have questions ready. Always have that kind of like, what is the main point you want to reiterate, you want to hammer in, and just have that ready, because they're always going to ask you that at the end of an interview. And live TV is a whole another thing, but obviously we're focusing more on print right now. But I hope that gives folks some encouragement, and also some sense of how to continue to find and develop those relationships over time, and how to get your message out there, and how to make sure that it's picked up and that it's relevant for the folks that we're wanting to reach. So I know we're a little over time. So is there any questions that anyone has to have, or anybody has? I know that we're also going to launch a poll here soon. Beautiful. Okay, there's a media landscape poll here. So if you want to go ahead and answer these questions, I think it's going to be helpful in going into our next sessions. Let's see here. Perfect. Was there any questions that came up in the chat, Janella, that we could answer, either me or Lorraine?
I'm scanning the chat right now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot around print and op-ed and letter to the editor. Of course, all of this requires, especially the op-eds and letters to the editor, requires a lot of background and perspective. So I think really a unique perspective. And what is that angle? Perfect. Great. Awesome. Op-eds are great. Lorraine, do you have any perspective on op-eds in particular?
Sure. I think especially keep them timely. It's very helpful to respond to something that's going on at that time. Make sure that you can add, because we want to forward the story, not just repeat the same information again and again. So make sure you have something new to add to it. It could be your personal perspective, since it's an op-ed. It can also be an organization's viewpoint. Feel free to share them with us. There's not a guarantee that they'll appear, but it's worth trying.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. Okay, perfect. Well, no,
I'm going
wait.
to
Yeah.
end the poll so we could see broadcast the results right now.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, I was looking at as it was coming in, so I was seeing a lot of the responses a little bit before everyone else.
Okay, let's share the results. Can you see them?
Great. I can see them. I hope our participants can. So it looks like folks were interested in primarily a newsletter, flyers, press conferences. I mean, I think all of these, again, I also feel like things can be repurposed, right? Like a press release can be linked in a newsletter. Or, depending on the format, I think a lot of these can be sort of shared. Press releases can also be listed on your website as well, as like news or new things like that. Recent articles can also be shared on social media. And so I think there's a lot of ways in which these things intersect. At the end of the day, people are reading op-eds sometimes on social media. So making sure that a lot of these things can be repurposed, and you don't have to write these things 10 different ways, 10 different times. I think a lot of these things can be linked to each other, and shared broadly. Even just getting outside of an echo chamber of just looking to the media outlet as your only amplification. I think like they have obviously their folks that they're communicating with, but getting outside of that echo chamber, if there's like a national newsletter, or if there's something that gets and breaks through sort of that current audience, you can always link it. You can always share it. I know some people share newsletters on their social media. So there's many ways in which people are receiving and consuming information. And I think a lot of times things can be repurposed or linked for different things.
Even social media is good for that. We have so many, we have Facebook and Nextdoor and X and so many different outlets, to use. just to get your message out there, just to remind people who you are, just to remind people of what matters to your organization. So I would use all of the above.
Yeah. And I know Gen AI was listed here and wasn't super popular, but what I will say in terms of time, what used to take me a half day to write a press release, I can write a press release now in like 30 minutes using Gen AI. So I would invest some time in figuring out how to work with it and how to navigate it. If you haven't already, I would say from a comms perspective, I always add, you know, my voice and different things to that. But being able to really format it correctly, being able to really pull out, because I think it helps with the sometimes we're a little biased and we think certain things are important, but we're like, I'm like, oh, Gen AI pulled this out of all that. I guess, yeah, that makes sense. And, you know, sort of, so I think using it as a tool, it's not an end all be all, but I would definitely encourage folks um, to figure out how to use the tool to best support you and make you more efficient in your communications. I know sometimes it tends to seem like, oh, it all sounds the same, but I think it's a starting point, and then you can edit from there and add some perspective to it. But I don't want to like, I know that there wasn't much interest in the poll on that, but I definitely would say don't hesitate or be intimidated by it. I'm not very tech savvy myself, but I really learned to love it and embrace it and really utilize it for just efficiency purposes and really being able to write something nice out. I actually used it for my most recent press release, and I think it came out fine. I think it was great. Let's
So
see.
we
AI
do
option.
have
Oh,
one chat.
they're talking about the Zoom.
We do have one question, one other question in the chat, and then we could probably move on to the example that you wanted to share. So the question is,
Okay,
does
sure.
anyone use LinkedIn for social media message?
Oh, I utilize for messaging. Oh, definitely. I'm obsessed with LinkedIn. My organization primarily supports first generation professionals and Latinas that are, you know, just first in their families to be a part of the workforce. And so that's where our folks are at. Many of them are on LinkedIn. And I think a lot of companies obviously are on LinkedIn as well. So I personally love LinkedIn. I think it's a great place to tag folks. The nice thing is that it acts as a network amplifier. So when you tag someone else, like if you tag someone who's a quote unquote influencer, their network gets alerted. So it's a great way. I think the algorithm honestly works better than and gets more reach than Facebook. And I don't know in comparison to Instagram, but I really think LinkedIn has a great network algorithm, and it's just in the nature of the tool in general. LinkedIn is all about networks, so I think network weaving is something that they really do. So I don't know about reporters how often they use LinkedIn. Lorraine, yes, you're
I go to LinkedIn whenever I write about anyone because I want to know about their personal background. I want to know about, sometimes they do have statements and I want to know where they're coming from. I want to know what organizations they're affiliated with. It definitely fills in my mind background about that person, about that subject, about that business. So I use it regularly. Absolutely.
beautiful. Yeah, it is a nice little kind of professional reference profile. And it shows your background and your experiences. And I think a lot of folks they tend to be topical, right? So they're always talking about certain topics. You can hashtag, like for me, it's like leadership, Latinas, women, workforce, financial literacy, the stuff that we touch on, wage gap. For issue areas, I definitely think you can find a lot of folks that are, like I said, the coalition of the willing, the people that are going to be supportive. You tend to find your crew on LinkedIn because they're constantly talking about similar topics or issues, even connecting with national organizations that are working on those issues. I know I find a lot of data and reports on LinkedIn as well. So I'll grab from national data. I mean, we have never been in a position. We on Saturday are announcing our first research report that we're going to be putting out to the world in 2 years from now. But for the most part, we aren't able to do our own research and provide our own data on a very macro level. So yeah, we get a lot of reports and things like that and access to data on LinkedIn. I'm glad you brought that up. Perfect. So wonderful. So there'll be an opportunity as well to ask any more questions, but I just wanted to say thank you so much to Lorraine for joining me on this conversation and providing her unique perspective. I really appreciate your time and of course your friendship.
Thank you, Gabby. It was my absolute pleasure. I'm delighted to be on this panel. Always delighted to talk to you. You are an absolute resource. And I appreciate everything that's being shared in the chat as well. And don't be afraid to reach out, even if you have the beginning of an idea or the beginning of a developmental plan. Keep us in the loop all the way through.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. And we love San Jose Spotlight. They're our local media source, and we are so appreciative of Ramona and Josh for their vision to have this wonderful resource. And not everybody has one in their community. So we're very, very lucky here in San Jose and in Santa Clara County. So wonderful. So from now on, we're going to dive into a little bit of a power mapping example and walk us through kind of a campaign of sorts. And this is a reflective look at something that Latina Coalition and many other community partners for decades actually have been working on. So to my point of like, sometimes advocacy and policy and issue area isn't something so finite. It might go on for many years or many decades. This is an example of that. So this is about the closure of Reed Hillview Airport in Eastside San Jose. For those of you who don't know the background on the history of Reed Hillview Airport in Eastside San Jose, the intended impact of this airport is that leaded fuel was polluting the neighborhood, and that there were impacts on the residents and the surrounding areas due to the Reed Hillview Airport planes going and landing operations. So that was really the impact statement that we were focusing on and how it was affecting people in the surrounding community. And the ask and the big message that was the unifying message was close Reed Hillview Airport. Everybody in the coalition had a different perspective, had a different reason why, had a different take on that ask, but everyone was unified around this message, and it was simple, it was direct, it could be understood clearly: close this airport. We understood that there were certain decision makers that had an influence on this closure of the airport. Not the only ones, but the first ones that we were gonna, oh, can you go back to a slide? Somebody was saying about, okay. So the closure of the airport, we knew that we had to first address the 5 board of supervisors. At that time, it was a different board of supervisors than we have now, because it was during the pandemic. But we needed 3 votes out of the 5 in order to make sure that we could get what we were asking for. So there was much background, many meetings. We made sure that we met with decision makers. We made sure we met with the media, everybody. We did a big press conference. We did a big walking day where we were alerting the neighbors. And sometimes if you want to get on television, you really have to have visual sort of movements. And that's why a lot of times press conferences, signage, those kind of things that you can sort of invite people to and see in real time. That's why all of that is very important, because for the news media, TV media, they want visuals. And print is obviously, they want other things besides that. But I think that's one thing that's really important to to news. Media and comms. So we had a plan. Yeah, visual is becoming very important in print too. Yeah, that's a good point. So again, a lot of these platforms are print media, eventually goes out on social media, right? And so images and a picture's worth 1,000 words kind of thing. I think everyone agrees to that. And so if you aren't having a media moment or something that's visually happening, it's good to also support with photos or any sort of professional professional photos that you can have. And mostly, I mean, our phones, an iPhone has pretty good professional capabilities. So it's pretty amazing how far technology has come. So you'll even see reporters showing up with their cell phones and they're like going live, or they're taking professional photos with their cell phones, and it's like not beyond the, you know, ideas of expectation around today's world, because we have a lot of power in our cell phones. So that's the setup for Reed Hill View. And we knew there was a long history there of trying to close it, and but like there was also a moment in time that the pandemic presented where people's health and well-being was really the focus point of the conversation. And so I think although Reed Hill View, people have been trying to shut down Reed Hill View for decades, it talks a little bit about speaking a little bit about timeliness and striking while the iron's hot. Well, we have people's attention as it relates to people's health. As we're talking about this, you know, obviously this pandemic, this virus, we're also talking about pollutants in the air and how much our health is impacted by that. So I think it was also where it says where preparedness meets opportunity. We were prepared. This campaign has been prepared, but the opportunity is that people were talking about people's health and well-being. And so definitely. So I think it's the more resources that you can provide, the better. So the next slide. Okay, don't get intimidated by this, but we love that there's clouds and lots of things going on. So this is a little bit of what we would look like, would be inside of my head. For example, I didn't actually have something like this when I was doing the campaign, but this is also in retrospect, and I think just is really helpful in telling the story of how we thought through this as a coalition. We really had, this is a power analysis grid. Up at the top, you see, you know, the operation of Reed Hillview Airport. That's an issue, right? Like that's the problem. Then you have leaded fuel, pollution, and the neighborhood impacts. Those are like the overarching problems that we were trying to address. And we knew that there were some different decision points, and that's where you can see with the red kind of like kind of star-shaped items there, is that we have the different moments in time that we were able to say that, okay, this is the time where we want to really dive in. So there was the Board of Supervisors. They did the release of a report and a study. They did an airport study that did in fact showcase that the pollutants that people were experiencing were worse than the pollutants during the height of Flint, Michigan, and the pollution of the water. And so there was a lot of very snippy, but also very compelling reasons why this was an urgent issue. There was also a congressional hearing that was happening as well. That was brought on by us informing our elected officials. So we informed Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren and her office, and let them know about what was happening on the ground in the community and the advocacy that was happening there. We invited her to the press conference. She wasn't able to attend. Again, one of those moments, it's not personal, but you know, things are getting heightened. We're working with, at the time, Supervisor Cindy Chavez, making sure that we're getting a lot of noise out there. We had a lot of reporters and media circling this issue. Then we also had the Board of Supervisors hearing, where they will be hearing this issue. So we organized the community to come out, talk about it, but at the same time, we're keeping the media informed every step of the way, and letting them know, like, hey, this is coming up. We want to make sure we were going to invite people. And so when the media is there at our press conference, we're saying, community, we need you to come out. voice your concerns, talk at the Board of Supervisors meeting. So beyond that, we're talking and having the media help us amplify this message out to the greater public that might be living in that area and might be unaware of the pollutants. Then you have the Save Reed Hillview Airport. So those are the I guess our the other side of the issue. That was, as we were saying, close Reed Hillview Airport, they were saying save Reed Hillview Airport. And so there was a bit of a conflict there, right? And media, they pick up on that, right? There's two sides to every story. And so they were sort of also involved at the time. And so you can see that there's a lot of different things that are happening. And then the triangles on the bottom are the different decision makers, right? And you got to really think through what is going to move those decision makers, because some decision makers are moved by public opinion, others are moved by social media pressure. Um, and others might be moved by a congressional hearing or hearing their congressperson say that this is an issue and it's happening in their area. So yeah, so I think just kind of thinking through all those different layers and kind of that power grid is really helpful to get a sense of like what the approaches are, and what the different, and this is a full-blown campaign. Not everything is to this extremity, but I feel like it's good to start here, and then obviously you can scale back based on, maybe you just need one vote and you just need to go directly and talk and meet with that person. And that's the communication that you need. But I think this is definitely on the end of a spectrum of like a full-blown, multiple organizations involved, multiple layers of government are being called to support this cause. And then really you have the neighborhood, the neighborhood group that's really the one driving a lot of this. And we've made it very intentional that as a nonprofit, that we make sure that those most impacted, their voices are really centered. So making sure that they are getting interviewed, that they're sharing their stories about living in that neighborhood. And so I think that's also something that's really important as you're thinking about which voices you really want to center, and any sort of campaign or message that you're putting out there. It should be those most impacted by this issue. And so sometimes that may be you as an individual and as an organization, but most of the times it's going to be community members, other community members. So making sure to really do your best to be able to have them share their stories and talk about those firsthand accounts. So next slide. Okay, so now we have different folks involved. So these were our groups that we were really focusing on and were really organized, or some were not as organized, but we had to get them organized. And so I think it's important to know that, youth played a really important role in this, because one of the things about the lead pollutants was that um, it caused developmental harms to young people and children. And so we wanted to make sure that children and youth were a part of this campaign. So making sure that community members were, bringing out their kids to these press conferences and to these different moments that were happening. We also had these little dolls that were visually very striking, and they were like hurt and dismembered and things like that, and really sort of signifying the pain that could be and the harm that can be caused to children. So that was also something we wanted to center. We also had the pilots, and they're coming around, and they would show up at our press conferences and like stand there and just, I guess, try to intimidate us. I don't know. But yeah, they were another group that was very organized and obviously involved. Then we had the local residents near the airport. So we did a flyering campaign. We made sure that the surrounding neighborhood knew about the study, knew about the findings, and that they were equipped to do something and say something and know when that opportunity arose, when to go and where to go to do that. We also had moms. I think we really energized a lot of moms that really were those caretakers in the community and those folks that were raising these children and caretakers in general. And so the elderly and folks like that, we wanted to make sure that they were also represented. And so that was layered upon all of this kind of power analysis script as well. Next slide. Okay, so now we have the organizations that are obviously it's in their mission, right, to get involved in this work, whether it's equity work, whether it's environmental justice work, whether it's I think a lot of different organizations got involved for a variety of reasons, and so we had groups like WAPUSA, which is Working Partnerships USA. We had Somos Mayfair, Latina Coalition. We had Luna. These are all part of the coalition. Amigos de Guadalupe, organizations that serve that area and serve those residents. I think it was really important to have them involved and to make sure that they were letting the folks that they serve and that trust them know about what was going on. Then you have other organized groups like PTAs of the local schools. Then you have like the governmental agencies. So you have the Department of Transportation, you have the EPA is involved in oversight. And, in general, we're also thinking about like leaded fuel, and the banning of leaded fuel isn't an issue that just affects Reed Hillview Airport. It could be a conversation that then spurs a conversation about leaded fuel in general. And so you see now the airline industry is like, okay, perking up their ears, because if there's a congressional hearing about this, well, that affects their bottom line. So if you're going to confront power at the local level, just know that then levels up, sometimes to a state level or to a national level. So this is what we'll be working on in our breakout groups. And hopefully we'll be able to be uplifting a current campaign or issue that you're working on. And we'll be able to kind of put this map together. It looks like a hot mess right now, but usually this is inside someone's head, not necessarily out there on a piece of paper. But just kind of walking you through it, I think is helpful. Next slide. Perfect. So now enter the media, right? Like, where does it make sense? Where does it make sense to do radio versus, press releases, and how does that happen? And I said, sometimes it reaches national media. So if it gets up into, a conversation about statewide impact, national impact, you start getting the Times involved, you start getting those folks, and they definitely did. NPR did a story because it even though it was a regional issue, it could have implications across the United States because there are regional airports across the United States. So they started getting involved. We also did a podcast, so was invited to do a podcast. So that was another opportunity to spread the word and talk about the message, which is close this airport now, ban leaded fuel. You just keep reiterating those messages on every single platform, every single media outlet, whether it's TV or a press release or an op-ed. I think we did it all. We did it all. Like everything that's on here. There was a TikTok that went viral. We didn't actually orchestrate that. It was amazing that a youth in the community had heard about it, and so did a TikTok. And then that's actually how NPR found out about the campaign. It wasn't even us in our press release. It was a youth doing a TikTok about what was happening at Reed Hillview. And then NPR picked that up. So sometimes these things kind of just spread like wildfire and goes even outside of your intended vision for it. But that was kind of a cool thing. One thing also is Nextdoor. I know a lot of us in comms are very concerned about the conversations that happen on Nextdoor, but it's good. It's good to know what are those conversations that are happening. At least even if you're not going to chime in, just understanding like what the pushback is, what the case for keeping it open might be, so that you can kind of craft your messaging to address some of those issues or concerns. I know one of the things came up was like, oh, they just want more affordable housing. Like this is all about affordable housing. And it was like, we had to like shift the conversation because they were scaring people with that. And I'm like, okay, talk about a redirection. Like that's total distraction. Like this is about, again, this isn't about affordable housing. This isn't about land use. And this is, I mean, it is about land use, but this isn't about that. This is about closing the airport. This is about banning leaded fuel. And you have to kind of not let people co-opt your message and get you distracted in another place. Just stay focused on the message. And that's why it's really important to have that core underscored message. Is there another slide after this? Are we doing another layer? Okay, no, good. Okay, so what we're going to do all together in our different breakout rooms is really reflect on the exercise of, you know, doing a power map, doing a kind of analysis of of what it is as advocates that we're trying to change, or what we're trying to make, you know, better, improve conditions. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to develop a specific problem statement based on the issue area. So I mentioned with Reed Hillview, the problem statement was this airport and its leaded fuel is polluting the surrounding neighborhood. This is an issue. This is a problem. People's health is at risk. So that's really, you're going to be able to identify the problem statement. And then you're going to say, well, and you don't have to do it all. Again, it doesn't have to be a scale of Reed Hillview, but prompt number 2 is, what media type will you personally use to get your story? So I would say focus on one media type that really speaks to you, and kind of go from there and dive into that. And then, or what you think would be most effective. And then the prompt 3 in the next phase, we are going to share your reasons for choosing that path, and with your group kind of talking through some of, like, as you've heard from me and Lorraine today, and as you've kind of understood the different kind of layers there, you're going to want to talk about coming up with what is the strategy that is going to incorporate all of your approaches, and be able to overlay it onto a power map to ultimately get what you want and need for the community. And so that's what we're going to do together. So kind of putting it to practice. And I think we're going to head into breakout rooms.
Alrighty. Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone had enough time to introduce themselves and go through the activity with your facilitator. I want to take a quick second to give Gabby and Lorraine a huge round of applause for setting up the stage in this workshop, letting us know what are the essentials in keeping connected with the media. One of my favorite parts is how to keep each other accountable, right? Because it's a two-way connection, it's a two-way relationship, and it was nice for them to acknowledge all the other things. So thank you all for your hard work and dedication to our sector and to the people on this call.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Before we move on, I just want to say, I don't know about you all, but my team wish we had more time, as always, to do some of that power mapping. I was describing to my team that, as Gabby said, most of this lives in our heads, and it's nice to have a platform to put it all on paper. So I really enjoyed that, and I hope that you all can share some of your comments in the chat about how that experience was for you, and if you were part of the last power mapping session and this was just a refresher for you. It was nice that you can be in a space with others who are learning some of these topics.